I've been married to Melissa for 8 years. We met back in college and honestly she was everything I thought I could ever want in a partner. Smart, funny, ambitious. Over time I thought we had built a solid life together. But looking back now I wonder if I missed all the signs. It started last month on a regular Thursday evening. I was at home scrolling through my emails when an anonymous message popped up on my phone. You should check your wife's messages. She's not who you think she is. I stared at it, feeling my chest tighten. Part of me wanted to delete it right away, but something about it nagged at me. When Melissa got home, everything seemed normal. She kissed me on the cheek and went straight to the shower. That's when I noticed her phone on the counter. I wasn't the type to go through her stuff. Trust was important, or at least I thought it was. But this message kept echoing in my head. So, I picked up her phone and hesitated. Her password hadn't changed. That small relief turned into an avalanche of dread when I saw a notification pop up from someone named Corey Work. The preview was enough to make my stomach drop. Can't stop thinking about last weekend. You looked amazing. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My hands were shaking, but I opened the message thread. There it was, messages going back weeks. Late-night chats, inside jokes, even a string of photos she sent him from the gym. The worst part? She signed off some messages with a dot. I didn't even hear Melissa come out of the shower. She walked into the kitchen, her hair wrapped in a towel, smiling at me like she hadn't just blown our entire life apart. My heart was racing. Should I confront her right there? Should I wait? Instead, I put her phone back where I found it and pretended everything was fine. Inside, I was already shattered. I barely slept that night. Every time she rolled over or mumbled in her sleep, I felt like screaming. The betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of it all. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was going to find out everything before I said a word. The next day, I called in sick to work. There was no way I could focus on anything else. I spent hours replaying every interaction, every excuse Melissa ever made. Business dinners, late-night meetings, weekends where she claimed she was with her friends. Were they all lies? I decided to take the message's advice and dig deeper. I started with her phone. While she was in the shower that night, I went back to the messages with Corey. It didn't take long to piece together the picture. They worked together and it seemed like he was her boss. The flirting started subtle but got more explicit over time. They'd met up multiple times and she'd lied to me about where she was every single time. It wasn't just the texts though. Corey sent pictures. Pictures of him shirtless at the gym, pictures of a fancy dinner that she clearly attended, the same night she told me she was at a girls' wine night. Melissa even sent him a selfie from our bedroom. By then my stomach was in knots and my hands were shaking. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Every time I thought I'd seen the worst, I found something worse. I had to force myself to keep calm, to not let her notice anything was off. That night, I casually asked her how work was going. She smiled and said it was fine, same old, same old. I wanted to throw her phone against the wall. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. I installed a tracking app on her phone while she was sleeping. It was easy and she didn't suspect a thing. If she was meeting up with Corey, I wanted to know where. The next morning, Melissa kissed me goodbye like nothing was wrong. "Love you," she said as she walked out the door. Those words stung like hell. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the tracking app. A few hours later, I saw her phone ping at a restaurant across town. Not her office. Not anywhere near her office. I clenched my jaw and grabbed my car keys. If she was with Corey, I needed to see it with my own eyes, and I drove to the restaurant, heart pounding the whole way. My mind kept racing through every possible scenario. What if I walked in and saw them? What would I say? What would they say? What if I was wrong? But deep down I already knew I wasn't. When I got there, I parked a few spots away from the entrance, out of view. Her car was there. My chest tightened. I sat there for a moment trying to calm down, but the anger bubbling inside of me was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I finally got out and walked toward the entrance. The restaurant had big windows and I could see the seating area clearly. I scanned the room until I spotted her. Melissa was sitting in a booth near the back. She was laughing, her hand casually resting on the wrist of a man sitting across from her. I recognized him immediately. Corey. He wasn't just her boss, he was the guy she always referred to as kind of a jerk at work. I stood there for a moment, frozen. It wasn't just the laughter or the way she leaned in while he talked, it was the way she looked at him. It was a look I hadn't seen from her in years. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of them through the window. I needed proof. Part of me wanted to burst through the doors and confront them right there, but I held back. I wanted to hear what kind of lie she'd tell me about this later. Instead, I walked back to my car and waited. I didn't even know what I was waiting for. Maybe I wanted to see how long they'd stay or if they'd leave together. An hour later, they walked out. She was smiling. Corey put his hand on the small of her back as they walked to their cars. They stopped near hers, talking for a bit. Then he leaned in and kissed her. That was it. Any hope I had, any denial I clung to, was gone. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Melissa got in her car and drove off, completely unaware that I'd seen everything. Corey left in the other direction. I sat there for a few more minutes, trying to gather myself. On the drive home, my mind raced. I needed a plan. Confront her? Collect more evidence? Talk to someone about it? All I knew was that this wasn't something I could ignore anymore. When I got home, I stared at the picture on my phone. It felt like my whole world was crumbling, but I also felt something else: determination. If Melissa thought she could lie and cheat without consequences, she was about to learn otherwise. That night, I tried to act normal, but it was almost impossible. Every time Melissa looked at me, all I could see was her laughing with Corey, her hand on his wrist, the kiss in the parking lot. My mind replayed it on a loop. "Everything okay?" she asked during dinner. I hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yeah, just tired from work," I lied, keeping my tone flat. She smiled, completely unfazed, and went on about her day, some fake story about a boring meeting and annoying clients. I forced myself to listen, but all I could think was how easy it was for her to lie to me. How many times had she done this? That night I couldn't take it anymore. After she fell asleep, I went into the living room and stared at the picture on my phone. My blood boiled just looking at it. I decided I wasn't going to wait any longer. The next morning I woke up before her and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. When she came downstairs, she looked surprised to see me sitting there, already dressed, with a cup of coffee in hand. "Wow, you're up early," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Can we talk?" Her face shifted slightly, just a flicker of hesitation, but enough to notice. "Sure," she said, sitting across from me. I slid my phone across the table, the picture of her and Corey at the restaurant open on the screen. Her smile vanished. She stared at it, then looked up at me, her face pale. "What is this?" "You tell me," I said, my voice low but steady. She opened her mouth to speak but stopped. Her eyes darted around like she was searching for an excuse, a way out. It's not what it looks like," she finally said. "Oh really?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Because it looks like you're out on a date with Corey, the guy you said was a jerk from work. And it definitely looks like you kissed him." Her face turned red. "Okay, yes, I met him for lunch, but it's not a date," she said quickly. "We were just talking about work stuff. The kiss, it caught me off guard. I didn't want it." I stared at her, completely stunned by how easily the lies came out of her mouth. "Melissa, don't insult me. I've seen the messages. I've seen the pictures you sent him. Are you really going to sit here and tell me this is nothing?" She froze, her hands trembling slightly. "You went through my phone?" she said, her voice rising. "That's such a violation of my privacy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously trying to make me the bad guy here?" I shot back. "You've been sneaking around, lying to me and cheating with your boss, and I'm the one in the wrong." Her face crumpled and she started crying. "I'm sorry, okay? I messed up, but it wasn't serious. It was just a stupid mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice cold. "How long has this mistake been going on?" She didn't answer, just kept crying into her hands. I stood up, unable to look at her anymore. I'm going out, I said, grabbing my keys. Don't bother calling me. As I walked out the door, her sobs echoed behind me, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt numb. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the whole day driving aimlessly, replaying the morning's confrontation in my head. Every lie, every excuse, every tear, none of it felt genuine. She wasn't sorry for what she did, she was sorry she got caught. By the time I pulled into a quiet park on the edge of town, I had made up my mind. I needed to protect myself before confronting her again. If she was already lying this easily, who knew what she'd say next? I called my friend Jake. We've been close since high school, and he's the kind of guy you can trust to keep things private. When I told him what happened, he was furious on my behalf. Man, I can't believe she did this to you, he said. What's your next move? I need more proof, I said. I already have the texts and the picture from the restaurant, but I want to see if she's still talking to him. I can't just rely on what she tells me. Jake was quiet for a moment. You could try hiring a private investigator, he suggested. The idea hadn't crossed my mind, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I didn't want to live in a constant state of doubt, and I needed to know the full story. So, after hanging up with Jake, I looked up a local investigator and made the call. I met with the PI the next day. His name was Frank, an older guy with a no-nonsense attitude. I showed him the texts, the pictures, and explained everything. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just nodded and said he'd take care of it. Give me a week, he said. I'll find out everything you need to know. For the next few days I tried to keep things as normal as possible at home, but it was exhausting. Melissa kept walking on eggshells, trying to act sweet and attentive, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She apologized a couple more times, saying she wanted to fix things between us, but I wasn't ready to even entertain that idea. Then, on Friday night, Frank called. I've got something for you, he said. We met at his office, where he handed me a folder. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were pictures and a detailed report. Melissa had met up with Corey twice since our confrontation, once at a coffee shop and once at a hotel. The pictures said it all, Melissa leaning into Corey, holding his hand, walking into the hotel lobby with him. My stomach churned as I flipped through them. Frank's report detailed times, locations, even snippets of conversations he'd overheard. Corey wasn't just her boss. He was married, and from the sound of their conversations, Melissa was starting to pressure him to leave his wife. I felt sick. Thanks, Frank, I said, my voice hollow. No problem, he replied. If you need anything else, let me know. As I drove home, the weight of everything hit me like a freight train. Melissa had made her choice and it wasn't me. But now I had everything I needed to confront her, and this time there'd be no way out for her. I spent all night staring at the folder Frank had given me, going through every photo and every word of the report. There was no room for doubt anymore. Melissa hadn't just betrayed me, she'd turned our life into a lie. By morning I knew what I had to do. When she came downstairs, I was waiting for her in the living room. She gave me a nervous smile, but I didn't return it. Sit down, I said firmly. Her smile faltered. What's going on? I said, sit down. She hesitated but eventually sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us and opened it, spreading out the photos and reports. Her face went pale. You want to explain this? I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. She looked at the pictures, her with Corey at the coffee shop, her holding his hand, her walking into the hotel with him. For a moment she just stared, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words. I can explain, she stammered. Go ahead, I said, leaning back. I'd love to hear it. Tears welled up in her eyes. It's not what it looks like. Really? I shot back, my voice rising. Because it looks like you've been sneaking around with Corey behind my back, even after you swore it was just a stupid mistake. She started crying, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was confused, she said between sobs. I didn't know how to end it. He kept reaching out and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Hurt his feelings? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. What about my feelings, Melissa? Or do those not matter to you anymore? Her sobs grew louder. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could fix everything, I thought. Stop, I interrupted, holding up my hand. Just stop. I don't want to hear any more lies. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her crying. I stood up and began pacing the room, trying to keep myself from exploding. I trusted you, I said, my voice breaking. I built a life with you. And this is what you do to me. She didn't answer. I turned to face her, my chest heaving. I know about the hotel, Melissa. I know about everything. So don't you dare sit there and act like this was just some harmless mistake. You knew exactly what you were doing. Her head snapped up, her face streaked with tears. It wasn't like that. I wasn't in love with him. Then why? I demanded. Why would you throw everything away for him? She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. I don't know, she whispered. I laughed bitterly. You don't know. That's your answer. She nodded, still crying. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm done, Melissa. I'm done with the lies, the excuses, all of it. You can have Corey or you can have no one. I don't care anymore. But you can't have me. Her sobs turned into full-blown hysteria. No. Please, we can fix this. I'll cut him off, I'll do whatever it takes, just don't leave me. But her words felt hollow. Empty. I'll be staying at Jake's for a while, I said, grabbing my jacket. You can stay here for now, but don't expect me to come back anytime soon. She ran after me as I headed for the door. Please don't go. We can fix this. I love you. I stopped and turned to look at her one last time. If you loved me, Melissa, this never would have happened. Then I walked out, leaving her sobbing in the doorway. Jake was already in his driveway when I pulled up, pacing with his hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets. He'd told me earlier to come over any time, but I didn't expect him to be waiting outside. You okay? He asked as I stepped out of the car. I shook my head. Not really. He didn't press. Instead, he slapped me on the shoulder and led me inside. Jake's place had always been my safe space. A bachelor pad with mismatched furniture, old movie posters, and a fridge full of beer. It was the kind of place you could just exist in without worrying about anything. I sat on the couch, and he handed me a beer without saying a word. I took a long sip, staring at the muted TV playing some late-night rerun. So, Jake finally said, sitting across from me. What's the plan? I exhaled slowly. I don't know, man. I told her I'm staying here for now. I just couldn't look at her anymore. Jake nodded, waiting for me to continue. I hired a PI, I admitted after a long pause. Found out she's still seeing him. They met up at a hotel. Jake's face darkened. Damn, man. I'm sorry. What are you gonna do? I shook my head. I think it's over. I mean, how do you come back from this? Even if she cuts him off, how do I ever trust her again? Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, taking a sip of his beer. Look, I don't want to tell you what to do. But from where I'm sitting, she made her choice. And it wasn't you. His words hit like a punch to the gut, but he was right. Melissa had all the chances in the world to come clean, to choose our marriage, and she didn't. I just keep thinking about what I did wrong, I muttered. What I could have done differently. Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. Stop that. This isn't on you. She made her decisions. Don't let her mess with your head like that. I nodded, even though the guilt still lingered. That night, I crashed on Jake's couch. I barely slept, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the image of her walking into that hotel with Corey, it all played on a loop. By morning, I'd made up my mind about the next step. The next morning, I woke up groggy and stiff from sleeping on Jake's couch. I sat there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to gather my thoughts. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. I needed to take action and start moving forward. Jake was already in the kitchen, frying up some eggs. Made you some coffee, he said, nodding toward the table. Thanks, I muttered, grabbing the mug. You figure out your next move yet? He asked, sliding a plate of eggs and toast toward me. Yeah, I said after a moment. I'm going to talk to a lawyer. Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I need to know my options, I continued. If this goes to divorce, I want to be prepared. He nodded slowly. Good call. You sure you're ready for that, though? I hesitated. Was I ready? Not really. But what choice did I have? Melissa had destroyed the foundation of our marriage. There was no going back to how things were. Yeah, I said finally. It's time. Later that day I met with a lawyer. Her name was Linda, and she didn't sugarcoat anything. I've seen this kind of thing more times than I can count, she said, flipping through her notes as I explained the situation. You have two options here: reconciliation or divorce. But based on what you've told me, it sounds like reconciliation isn't on the table. No, it's not, I said firmly. She nodded. Then let's talk about next steps. First, you'll need to gather all your financial documents, bank statements, tax returns, anything you share with your wife. Do you have a prenuptial agreement? No, I admitted. Okay, she said, jotting something down. That makes things a bit messy, but it's manageable. Do you own your home together? Yes. She sighed. That's going to be a point of contention, especially if she wants to keep it. Do you know if she's likely to fight you on that? I thought about it for a moment. Melissa had always loved the house, but after everything she'd done, I wasn't about to let her keep it without a fight. She might, I said. But I'm not just going to hand it over to her. Linda gave me a small, encouraging smile. Good. Stay firm. The more documentation and evidence you have, the better. If you want to file, I can start the paperwork today. Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut, but I nodded. Let's do it. Walking out of Linda's office, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness, anger, relief. This wasn't how I imagined my life turning out, but at least I was taking control of the situation. Now, I just had to tell Melissa. That evening, I drove back to the house. I hadn't been home since the morning I left, and just pulling into the driveway made my stomach churn. The place didn't feel like home anymore, it felt like a battlefield. Melissa's car was parked out front. The sight of it reminded me of everything I'd learned, every lie she'd told. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady myself, then stepped out of the car. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, startled, and set the phone down quickly. "You're back," she said, her voice tentative. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "We need to talk." Her expression shifted to something between fear and guilt. "Okay," she said, sitting up straighter. I walked to the living room and stood over her. "I met with a lawyer today," I said bluntly. Her eyes widened. "What? Why? I thought we were going to work through this." "Work through what?" I snapped. "You've been lying to me for months. You're still seeing Corey, even after everything we talked about. Do you really think I'm just going to sweep this under the rug?" "I'm not seeing him anymore," she protested. I laughed bitterly. "Don't lie to me, Melissa. I have proof. I know about the hotel. I know you've still been meeting him." She froze, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. I was just trying to end things with him," she stammered. "Do you even hear yourself?" I said, my voice rising. "You've had every chance to come clean, to fix this, and instead you keep lying to my face. I'm done." Her face crumpled and she started crying. "Please don't do this," she sobbed. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cut him off, I'll go to counseling, I'll—" "No," I interrupted, my voice cold. "You don't get to decide what happens next. This is my choice now." She stared at me, her tears falling freely. "What do you want me to do?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "But I'm willing to keep things civil if you cooperate. You'll move out of the house and we'll figure out the rest through the lawyers." Her jaw dropped. "Move out? But this is our home." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "You gave that up the moment you betrayed me." She started shaking her head, her sobs growing louder. "You can't just throw me out. I don't have anywhere to go." "You can stay with Corey," I said, my voice sharp. You seemed fine spending time with him before. Her face twisted with a mix of anger and desperation. That's not fair. Fair? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You want to talk about fair? You've been lying and cheating for months, and now you want me to feel sorry for you? You're lucky I'm even giving you a chance to leave on your own terms. She didn't say anything after that, just buried her face in her hands and cried. I stood there watching her for a moment, then turned and walked toward the door. You have a week to move out, I said over my shoulder. After that, I'm changing the locks. I left without waiting for a response. The weight in my chest felt a little lighter as I drove away. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. The next few days were tense, even though I wasn't staying at the house. I hadn't heard much from Melissa since I told her she had a week to move out, but every now and then she'd send a text or leave a voicemail, begging me to reconsider. Please just talk to me, one voicemail said. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to fix. Jake helped me get through those days, keeping me busy with errands and long conversations. I started seeing a therapist too, hoping it would help me process everything. It was a slow process, but it felt good to have someone neutral to talk to, someone who wasn't trying to tell me what to do. On the 5th day, Melissa texted me, "Can we meet? Please, just one last conversation. I need to say something." At first, I ignored it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed closure too. I needed to hear her say it, to admit what she did and why. I agreed to meet her at the house the next evening. When I arrived, the place looked different. Some of her things were already packed up and stacked near the door. She was sitting on the couch, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was messy, her eyes red and puffy. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly as I walked in. "Say what you need to say," I replied, standing near the doorway. She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I know I can't undo what I've done," she began. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "You have a funny way of showing it." "I was stupid," she continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I let myself get caught up in something I didn't even want. Corey, he made me feel needed in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But it was never real. It was never what I wanted." Her words stung, but I forced myself to stay composed. "And what about me? I needed you too. But instead of turning to me, you turned to him." She sobbed harder, shaking her head. "I know. I was selfish. I thought I could have both, but I lost everything instead. I don't even want to see him anymore. I ended it for good." I crossed my arms, my voice cold. "You ended it because you got caught. If I hadn't found out, would you still be sneaking around with him?" She didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. "I'm sorry, Melissa," I said after a long silence. "But I can't do this anymore. You made your choice and now I'm making mine." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing. "I wish I could take it all back," she choked out. "But you can't," I said simply. "And I can't keep living with someone who betrayed me." I turned to leave, but she called out one last time. "Will you ever forgive me?" I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. "Maybe someday," I said quietly. "But not today." I walked out without looking back. Leaving the house that night felt different than before. It wasn't just anger or heartbreak, it was a kind of finality. I wasn't walking away to cool off or gather my thoughts. I was walking away from Melissa, from the life we'd built, and from everything I thought our marriage had meant. Back at Jake's place, I told him how it went. He didn't say much, just nodded and handed me another beer. That's what I liked about Jake. He didn't try to fill the silence with platitudes or advice. He just let me sit with my thoughts. The next morning I made a list. I'd always been the kind of person who needed structure, and right now my life was chaos. So I started small. Find a new place to live. Divide our finances. Get rid of anything that reminded me of Melissa. The first step was easier said than done. I spent the next few days apartment hunting, driving around town to check out listings. Most of the places were tiny or run down, but I didn't care. I just needed somewhere that was mine, somewhere I could start over. By the end of the week, I found a small one-bedroom apartment not far from Jake's. It wasn't much, but it was clean, quiet, and affordable. I signed the lease and started moving in the following weekend. Meanwhile, Melissa kept trying to reach out. I ignored most of her messages, but one caught my eye. I packed the rest of my things and moved out today. The house is yours. I left my key on the kitchen counter. It was short, and for once there were no pleas for forgiveness. I drove by the house later that evening to make sure she was gone. True to her word, the place was empty. It felt strange walking through the rooms, seeing them stripped of her presence. I stood in the kitchen for a while, staring at the key she'd left behind. Part of me felt a pang of sadness, but another part felt relief. This chapter of my life was officially closed. Over the next few weeks, I focused on settling into my new place. I bought some second-hand furniture, hung a few photos, and started building a routine. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness hit me hard, when I missed the life I used to have. But slowly, I started to feel lighter. The anger and sadness didn't disappear overnight, but they started to fade bit by bit. One night, Jake came over with a pizza and a six-pack. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his bottle. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. About a month after settling into my new apartment, life had finally started to feel normal again. Well, a new kind of normal. I was going to work, hitting the gym, and even catching up with friends I hadn't seen in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Then, one evening as I was scrolling through emails on my laptop, a notification popped up. A message from Melissa. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to open it or delete it. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the best of me. The email was long, but it was nothing like the desperate texts and voicemails she'd sent before. This one was calmer, more reflective. Subject: I know you don't want to hear from me. Hi. I don't expect a response, but I needed to say a few things. First, I want you to know that I'm still sorry for everything I've done. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. I've been going to therapy, trying to figure out why I made the choices I did. It's not an excuse, but I realize now that I was deeply unhappy, not with you but with myself. I felt like I was losing who I was, and instead of dealing with that, I looked for validation in all the wrong places. I know this doesn't change anything, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming a better person, even if it's too late for us. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me, but more than that, I hope you find happiness again. You deserve it. Melissa. I read the email twice, unsure of how to feel. Part of me wanted to be angry, to dismiss her words as too little, too late. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, felt a small sense of closure. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop and sat there, staring at the blank wall in front of me. Her words stirred something in me, not anger or sadness, but a strange kind of peace. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and maybe I never would be. But for the first time, I felt like I could move forward without looking back. After Melissa's email, I felt a shift within myself. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was like a weight had been lifted. Her words didn't undo the damage, but they gave me the closure I didn't realize I needed. I decided to focus on the things that made me happy. For the first time in years, I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always been passionate about but had let slip during my marriage. Being behind the camera again felt freeing, like I was rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten. One weekend, Jake convinced me to come to a local bar with some friends. "You can't hide in your apartment forever," he joked, dragging me along. At first, I wasn't sure if I was ready to be around people, let alone try to have fun. But as the night went on, I found myself laughing, enjoying the music, even talking to new people. That's when I met her. Her name was Rachel, and she was nothing like Melissa. She wasn't overly polished or rehearsed. She was warm, genuine, and refreshingly honest. We started talking over a shared love of old movies, and before I knew it, hours had passed. When she laughed, it wasn't forced or calculated. It was real, the kind of laugh that made you want to keep the conversation going just to hear it again. At the end of the night, she asked for my number. I hesitated for a second, but something about her felt different. So, I handed her my phone, and she punched in her number with a smile. "Call me," she said, her tone light but hopeful. As I walked back to my car that night, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I thought I'd lost: hope. Rachel and I started talking regularly. We kept things casual at first, just coffee dates, long phone calls, and walks in the park. She knew about my past, and I appreciated that she never pushed me to talk about it more than I was comfortable with. One night, as we sat on a bench overlooking the river, she asked, "Do you think you'll ever fully trust someone again?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I want to," I said honestly. "It's hard though. After everything that happened, it's like there's always this little voice in the back of my head telling me to be careful, to keep my guard up." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's fair. But trust isn't something you give all at once. It's built piece by piece." Her words stuck with me. Over time, Rachel showed me what trust could look like. She was patient, consistent, and never gave me a reason to doubt her. Slowly but surely, I felt my walls starting to come down. Months passed and life started to feel stable again. My photography hobby turned into a side gig, and I even had a few of my shots displayed at a local gallery. Rachel was there, cheering me on every step of the way. As for Melissa, she faded into the background of my life. Occasionally I'd hear about her through mutual friends, but I didn't dwell on it. She was a part of my past, a chapter I'd closed. One evening, as Rachel and I sat on my balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reached over and took my hand. "You seem happy," she said softly. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized she was right. "I am," I said, squeezing her hand. "I really am. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they didn't define me anymore. I'd survived it all, and now, I was finally moving forward into a future that felt brighter than I ever thought possible."